الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله وكفى بالله شهيدا فصلى الله عليه وعلى آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين صدق الله العظيم اللهم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه اللهم آنس وحشتنا في قبورنا وارحمنا بالقرآن العظيم واجعله لنا إماما ونورا وهدى ورحمة آمين. So my dear respected brothers and sisters, children, I've just recited an ayah from Surah Al-Jum'ah and I'll get to it in a minute. But it's an important season. It's a season of commencement and graduation. If any of you know people in high school or in college, they're moving on to another phase of their lives. And I'm from Zaytuna College. We just had our first commencement in California. So this has been on my mind. What does that really mean? To acquire knowledge and then go out into the world. And the acquisition of knowledge is not something that just happens at one phase of your life. This is why we like to call it a commencement into a life of learning and service. Because this is just the beginning and not the end. But also, it's the first of Sha'ban. So the month of the shadow of the month of Ramadan is cast upon us. And you particularly feel the impact of that and the intensity of that in the summer months, especially after someone like me has traveled from Berkeley, California to Las Vegas, where you feel the intensity of the heat, perhaps a little bit more than people who are accustomed to this area, but nonetheless, we're all human beings. And we feel the heat. So it's going to be a hot Ramadan and a long Ramadan. So I'd like to say a few words about that. And I'm going to tie both of these topics together. So commencement and Ramadan. And I want to do that by first talking about knowledge. You know, going to college and or high school and getting a degree or going to school, we gain knowledge. And this is one of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God be exalted, has the only thing He's commanded us to seek and increase in. قُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا. Say, oh my Lord, increase me in knowledge. Because knowledge is very, very important and it has a higher purpose. And we are also told in the Quran when, for example, Yusuf alayhi salam, when he puts himself forward before the king, he says, Inni hafizun alim. I am one who is trustworthy, a protector or guardian. I won't betray you. I will safeguard the treasures. But alim is not just is sufficient to be a good person. You have to also have the right skills and you have to have the right knowledge base. And so what really happens is in our schools and colleges these days, we go and we get the right knowledge base. But we're also warned in the Quran, in Surah Ash-Shura and other places, وَمَا تَفَرَّقُوا إِلَّا مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَهُمُ الْعِلْمُ بَغْيًا بَيْنَهُمْ. They didn't disagree with each other and dispute and fall into these schismatic disputations until after ilm had come to them. بَغْيًا بَيْنَهُمْ. They and there's a few translations I have from different authors, different translators, jealous animosity, rivalry, selfish envy. And this is a very important indication for us that knowledge without moral commitment, and preparation. And knowledge without a higher purpose can be extremely harmful. It becomes information, and it can guide you in any direction, in any wayward direction. And so when we speak about knowledge, we need to speak about it in its holistic sense, and not just in its fragmented sense. Because we can have people who can go out and learn a great many things and can call them knowledgeable, but they may be morally corrupt and completely misguided and do great harm with their knowledge. And so when we look at our education systems and our educational programs, and when we examine our own ambition as we embark on the quest for knowledge and in the pursuit of knowledge, we should really think about what it is that we are after. Because humility is key. And the ayah that I recited, I'll mention it a few times, هُوَ الَّذِي بَعَثَ فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ, that He is the one, this is God the exalted, who raised from among the unlettered people a messenger from among them. يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ. He would recite to them these ayats of the Almighty, and this would purify them. Because knowledge in and of itself, without a pure heart, can lead to great corruption. And we're also told in the same surah, Surah Yusuf, I mentioned, Inni Hafizun Alim. There's another phrase in that surah, a part of an ayah, which says, وَفَوْقَ كُلِّ ذِي عِلْمٍ عَلِيمٍ. It's a beautiful section, that above everyone who thinks he knows is one who knows more. And so if that's anything that a good education will teach you, is not how much you know, but how little you know. And if this often happens to people, especially if they're blessed with special touch of the divine, if you will, humility and perspective, after they leave school, and sometimes even after PhDs, they are more tentative about the claims they make. And they're more hesitant about making categorical assertions about the world, about issues, about complicated problems that confront individuals or the society. Because it's not that they now know less than they did when they went to study. Because maybe before they went to study, they were really sure about everything. And this is what it's all about. And let me tell you the answers to all the questions that you have. After they leave a program of study, they might be, well, I'm not so sure, I don't know. Because it's not that the program took away from them anything. It certainly gave them something. But it made them realize how little they know. And that's not a bad thing. فَوْقَ وَفَوْقَ كُلِّ ذِي عِلْمٍ عَلِيمٍ. And really the purpose of knowledge, when we look at the prophets and the Prophet ﷺ, and he's described in the Quran, he has many ayats that speak about the character of the Prophet. وَإِنَّهُ عَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. You are certainly on a most upright character. But the Prophet ﷺ he was given knowledge from God, and all the prophets were special knowledge in their case, and they transmitted it to us. They conveyed the message of God to us. And this is what was their role, this is what they did with their knowledge. They were da'is. Ya ayyuhan nabi, inna arsalnaka shahidan wa mubashiran wa nadhiran. Yes, O Prophet, we sent you as a shahid, as a witness unto humanity. Wa mubashiran, as someone who gives good tidings to the people. That if they're doing the right thing, they have to be patient. Maybe it's not the easiest thing to do, but good news for you. Stay on it. Don't lose heart. وَنَذِيرًا, and as a warner for those who are not on that path, to warn them, if you stay on this path, it's going to catch up with you, suddenly even. Watch out, there will be accountability. إِنَّا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ شَاهِدًا وَمُبَشِّرًا وَنَذِيرًا وَدَاعِيًا إِلَى اللَّهِ بِإِذْنِهِ, and as one who calls towards Allah by His permission. The prophets were da'is. They conveyed, they did tabligh. وَإِنَّمَا عَلَى رَسُولِنَا الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينُ, to clearly and eloquently convey the message. And وَدَاعِيًا إِلَى اللَّهِ, to call towards the path of God. And we have to realize that if we are in the quest of knowledge, pursuing knowledge, and we don't have this goal in mind, it's not a prophetic path. It's another path. And we really have to examine our intentions. It may be that we just want to become rich and famous, and that's a problem. It may be that we want to become rich and or influential so that we can do good in the world, so that we can provide for our families and for those who have been less fortunate, and for the furthering of the deen. Then it's the same pursuit, but it's a different ambition. And so this is where I would invite all of us to really examine what we are doing. It shouldn't be neutral, and it can't be neutral. Unless, sometimes people are in very difficult circumstances, and they really have to do whatever is available to them. And these things are allowed in the religion. When you have extenuating circumstances, and God is forgiving. He knows everyone's circumstance. But whenever it is possible, and we can examine our own intentions, and we can elevate ourselves through our intentions, if not the actual material means that we have at our disposal, we should do that. Because ultimately, it is that inner reality that is going to come back and either become a garden for us or something far less delightful. So keep that in mind. The Prophet ﷺ was commanded, "Ud'u ila sabili rabbik." Call towards the path of your Lord. Bil hikmah, with wisdom. Wal ma'uzatil hasana, and through good admonition, beautiful sermons. Wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan, and through disputation, but in a way that is better. In a way that is better. And so these are all different ways in which human beings communicate. And in our classical tradition, the word hikmah was at times the direct translation for the word philosophy. There's even titles of books on Sharia and hikmah, like reason and revelation, or philosophy and law. Because when you speak at the level of hikmah, or at the level of philosophical discourse, there are certain conditions that kind of discourse has. And we have to respect it. And when we look at the Quran, it's interesting that the prophets always did that. And the best example of this is Ibrahim alayhi salam. I'll give you one mention of this, and we can look at all of the different places where he's mentioned. It's really quite remarkable. When he was in the court of the king in Surah Al-Baqarah, and he says, "My Lord gives life and death." The king says, "Well, I give life and death." And then according to the interpretive tradition, the tafsir, what does that mean? Obviously the king doesn't do that. He took a free person and he condemned him to death, slew him. And he took someone who was condemned to death and freed him. And that was his argument for "I give life and death." Now obviously it's fallacious, doesn't work. But this is what, at least the way the Quran puts forward this. He didn't say, "Well, this is a fallacious argument, you really didn't give him life," and so on. Ibrahim alayhi says, "Okay, all right, I'll give you that. I'll give you that. You say that you can do this? Fine." The implied premise is you can do whatever my Lord can do. So now we're in an interesting conversation at your level. And so my Lord brings the sun up from the east, bring it up from the west. فَبُهِتَ الَّذِي كَفَرَ. And so the one who was disbelieving was confounded utterly. And what we do today is when we look at da'wah, sometimes we don't even understand where the other person is coming from. And we go out on our high horse and we say, "Here's an ayah, and I did my job. I was told, convey, even if it's an ayah, بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي وَلَوْ ayah, here it is, and now it's up to you." But the person didn't even understand it. And the messengers were sent in the language of the people, which includes culture. لِيُبَيِّنَ لَهُمْ, so that they would make it plain to them. And when we look at Ibrahim alayhi salam, he does this throughout. He is always coming to the level of those he's talking to and trying to understand their framework and their premises and adopting them and showing them how that if you lead them to certain conclusions, how it's so inconsistent and sometimes absurd. And so when we do da'wah and hikmah and maw'idah hasana, speak from heart to heart, and jadal and disputation, all of these ways. But the prophets were commanded to do this. And now the best knowledge is, I'm going to pivot from commencement to Ramadan. If you're seeking knowledge and you're commencing into a life of whatever life you have thought out for yourself after finishing a course of study, it is never late to examine yourselves. And maybe that things you were doing for a different reason would become an asset for you going forward with renewed intentions. Now, in that light, giving that higher knowledge, higher learning has a higher purpose and not a lower purpose. The highest form of knowledge, we have an indication of this as well, both in the Quran and in the tradition. Ar-Rahman. 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 This is one ayah. Allama al-Quran. Out of all the things Ar-Rahman could have taught, he taught the Quran. This is the highest learning. خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانِ عَلَّمَهُ الْبَيَانِ. You can put it together. Like the first half of the khutbah is in a way an explanation of these. One way to look at these. The most merciful, he taught the Quran, he created human beings and taught them eloquent speech. And so, make the learning of the Quran at the heart of your endeavors to seek knowledge. And then the conveying of it to others. And we're told in a hadith, خَيْرُكُمْ مَنْ تَعَلَّمَ الْقُرْآنَ وَأَعَلَّمَهُ. The best of you is the one who learns the Quran and teaches it to others. Now to some of you this may sound like, well, it doesn't make sense to me. I understand it at a theoretical level. But practically, the Quran is so difficult and it's so far away and sometimes it's repetitious and I just can't, I don't know what that means to learn it and teach it to others. So I want to unpack, that a little bit more. But before I do that, I want to speak just briefly about the centrality of the Quran in our deen. Because today is Friday and the ayah I recited in the beginning, وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ, to purify them. This is an ayah from Surah Al-Jumu'ah. And most of you probably know, some of you may not know, there's actually a surah in the Quran called Surah Al-Jumu'ah, the day of the week, and we're here on Jumu'ah. And what made this day distinct, among other things, is the khutbah. And so it's not 4 rak'at, it's 2 rak'at. And we have a khutbah. And we're told in tradition, كانت لرسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم خطبتان. That for the Prophet ﷺ, he had 2 khutbahs. وَيَجْلِسُ بَيْنَهُمَا, and he would sit in between them. What did he do? What did he say? And it's interesting, we don't really get a book on the khutbahs of the Prophet ﷺ. It's not really, we look at hadith, we look at the seerah, because this tradition gives us a clue why. Khutbatan, 2 khutbahs. يَجْلِسُ بَيْنَهُمَا, you sit in between them. We still do this. يَقْرَأُ آيَاتٍ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ وَيُذَكِّرُ النَّاسِ. He would recite ayat from the Quran and remind the people. And now this makes sense in the prophetic milieu, to his immediate audience. The people who are listening to the Prophet are Arabs. The Quran is being revealed in Arabic. It's being revealed in an Arabic, a dialect that's familiar to the audience. And it's speaking of circumstances and events that are happening around them and of people who are around them. And it made perfect sense to them. Now if one of us were to stand here and just recite the Quran, it would just completely go over our heads. And so we have to have an attempt at interpreting, at rendering, at understanding, and then conveying through that medium. We are removed from their origins by time, 1430 plus years, and by geography, and by culture. Yet we believe that there's a transcendent element in revelation that is able to tap into every age and every time and every culture. And we have to make our effort. But the Prophet ﷺ's example was يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. He would recite the Quran and purify the people. Because we have diseases in the heart. False ambition, pride, greed, arrogance, envy, lust, all the things. Yuzakkihim. No, you're going to die. This is nothing. There's another reality. You attached to this, I mean, just look around you. Nothing stays. Nothing is ever saved. Nothing will ever stay except for God. We all know it. So it reminds us. And then it teaches us. وَيُعَلِّمُهُ الْكِتَابِ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. And one of the surahs that Prophet ﷺ was recited in the khutbah was Surah Qaf. Just the surah, entire surah was his khutbah. Qaf wal-Qur'an al-Majid. This is how it begins. And you know how it ends? فَذَكِّرْ بِالْقُرْآنِ مَنْ يَخَافُ وَعِيدٍ. Remind them through the Qur'an. Remind the one who fears the warning and the threat. Remind them through the Qur'an. And so, on the day of Friday was actually a day of the Qur'an through the khutbah. This is the day of Qur'an. We come closer to the book. And the Prophet ﷺ, لِتُبَشِّرَ بِهِ الْمُتَّقِينَ, that you warn through this Qur'an, you give good tidings through this Qur'an. وَلِتُنذِرَ بِهِ وَجَاهِدْهُمْ بِهِ قَدْ جَاءَتْكُمْ مَوْعِظَةٌ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ وَشِفَاءٌ لِمَا فِي الصُّدُورِ. For whoever is able to understand the reference, and for others, at least I'm sure the rhetorical force of the one ayah after another conveys a sense that the Qur'an is just saying, convey through me, convey through this book, warn them through this book, strive against them through this book, guide them through this book. This is what it's saying over and over. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ did. And so we have to look at really how close we are to this book. Now coming to Ramadan. شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن. You know, this is a month of fasting in most of our minds. And that's true. كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامِ. And you fast in this month. But the purpose of fasting is لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that you would have this taqwa. And this is ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. This is the core purpose of fasting. Everything else flows out from this. Because the Quran doesn't guide everybody. The Quran guides some people, and some it lets to go astray. Even through it, يُضِلُّ بِهِ كَثِيرًا وَيَهْدِي بِهِ كَثِيرًا. Through it. And so, if you want to come to it with a pious heart. And what is it that increases this sense of piety? It's fasting, self-restraint. And we know in Ramadan, man sama wa man qama. It's the two-part program of fasting and then standing in prayer. And that night prayer is with the Quran. Now, in Ramadan, there's one night. We go from a week to like a month. And this is our religious life, our faith and practice revolves around these. The rhythm of life of Islam is Jum'ah, it's Ramadan, and it's Laylatul Qadr. Inna anzalnahu fi Laylatul Qadr. It's all celebrating the Quran. And so the question we have to ask is, when we combine knowledge and the quest for knowledge and Ramadan and Jum'ah, it really comes back to calling people to God through the Quran. And really, in order to do that, you obviously have to know your Lord and you have to know yourself. Don't be like those who forgot God and you make them forget their own selves. And so it centers you, the knowledge centers you, and then it invites others to join in that experience. This is what our tradition really teaches us. And we have to remember it. So if some of you are so far away, you're not sure, but what does this mean for me? How do I learn the Quran? It's a good thought. It's a good, I think, question to have for yourselves. And when we look at institutions or communities, you should really think about organizing them and yourselves and some of your resources in order to help bring people closer to the Quran. And this is a lifelong journey. No one ever knows it completely. No one ever can exhaust it. But it is the resource that we have to take us through. the last point I want to make is, and I don't have enough time to do this, but I still have to do it. Difference of opinion. Because it's all well and good to say, well, yeah, go to the Quran. But now you come to me and I say, well, the Quran is saying this. You go to someone else and they say, well, the Quran is saying this. You go to a third person and they say, well, I think the Quran is saying this. And sometimes all these people don't agree with each other. Maybe don't even like each other. Now, where does that leave you? Right? This is a tough one. And I want to, just before there's no really good answer or easy answer for this, other than this is the human condition. This is human nature. This is how we were created. This dilemma exists in everything that we do. And for those of you who are doctors here, some of my very good friends, they would never have gone into medicine if they only looked for one opinion in every case. It doesn't work that way. You acquire knowledge, or deep information, however you want to use the terms, and then you do the best you can with the right intentions in order to do your job, serve the people. And sometimes you get it right, hopefully most of the time. Sometimes you get it wrong. And you build a reputation that way, and then people may come to you, and if it's extremely important, they will get a second opinion. This is how everything works. And so religion is, in that way, part of human experience. And we have been created with rational faculties, and we sometimes disagree. And this disagreement was always there in our tradition. It was always there. And if I take some names like Ibn Sina, Al-Biruni, Imam al-Ghazali, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Rushd, Ibn Arabi, we'll be like, yeah, this is the glory of Islamic civilization. It is. But what we don't realize is these individuals were centuries apart, sometimes, and they were actually continents apart. And they wrote against each other at times vehemently, in great disagreement. But today we stand on their shoulders, because the creative tensions that were developed through deep learning and broad engagement with experiential world, the physical world, the world inside of us, we produce a culture of knowledge. And today, we stand on all of their shoulders. And we look back and say how great we were. And so the question for us today is, can we be great again if we only want to have one of those remain alive today? Now, this doesn't mean that we are relativists and we promote all of them. You have to make this happen naturally. You take your stand. You do your best. You work hard, you find a position that seems most convincing to you, and in humble devotion to your Lord, you continue seeking for guidance, but you go along this path. And others will do the same, and there will be disagreement. Don't let that hold you back. You have to go on this path. You have to. It's the path that the great souls of the past have followed, and it's the path that we must follow as well. And it cannot be trodden except through the Quran and through coming close to the Quran. So those were my words of advice. In conclusion, I'll say, I've just mentioned one contemporary scholar, Dr. Omar in Chicago. I think most people respect him greatly. He wrote a very nice paper, and among the first 2 points that he writes, it's like a roadmap for us communities. He says, number one, you have to trust reason. It's got to make sense. And number two, we have to start respecting dissent. And there are guidelines for this, but inshallah, I hope that anything good I have said is something that stays with us and brings great benefit. Anything wrong that I've said or misguided, I hope that God erases it from our hearts and minds and forgives me. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين والمسلمات إنه هو الغفور الرحيم فاستغفروه.